Thanks, Felicia. Hey guys, happy Friday. Welcome to our odd count herringbone class. Today's a really fun one and it's something different. And I just wanted to start out by saying it is a little bit intermediate. I know we do a lot of classes that they're, mostly beginner friendly. This one's just a little bit intermediate, but not difficult, not hard. And we did in the handout put a link to the original Back to Basics Herringbone 101. So even count, here's the basics of the stitch and starting it. So we have a class we already did on that this one kind of builds on. And I linked it in the PDF for you. So if you're looking for it, you can easily find it there. It's a hyperlink. That said, if you're new, stick around, follow along, just watch. Usually I do kind of work a little bit fast to get it all in the hour. And I have jump aheads, right? I have things that are worked in advance so that you get to see every step. So it tends to go a little fast. So especially if you're new, you might want to just kind of like watch for the class, and then the replay comes out. Since we're going into the weekend, I'm guessing it's probably going to be until Tuesday that we'll see the replay come out. But we
I would
always
agree
post
with
it.
you, Danielle.
Yeah, I was just wondering. Memorial Day is Monday here in the US, so it'll be Tuesday for that. So, and we always post it, and we share it a couple places, so you guys will see it if you're following us on social media or in our Facebook group, and on our blog as well. Usually link it there too. Okay, so with all that said, I'm just going to jump in. I've got on my mat a bunch of stuff. Thanks, Felicia. So I've got the original, of course, and the colors that I used in the original. And then I've got a surprise colorway that I came together with using the same convention. So I like to build what a lot of seed beaters call like a recipe for creating color palettes. And this is kind of like a hint into next week's class, which is our color theory class. But what I like to do is I create recipes of quantity and like kind of style of bead, opaque, something either transparent or matte or both, frosted or silver lined, going through those kind of like, checking the boxes and getting something that's kind of flowing in an ombre. So that's what I did here. And it's the same exact convention followed in this design in a completely different palette. So you can see how it comes together. It's really fun. We'll have a lot of fun with this next week, but I thought I would do one just for inspo, and also so I have a finished one that I can show you finishing on, because that last row has a little trick that I always love sharing. All right, so what I was going to do is, if you love these colors, I'll pop those into the Facebook group, and I'll post this also on my Insta with all these named with the Michaels part numbers. These are all on the Michaels wall, every color I used here. So what I've got on the mat, in addition to the beads, is I've got some clasps, and of course you can use any clasp you want, but I grabbed these because they have a feature I really like, which is they have a closed ring that you can just stitch right into. So I'll be pulling one of those off, and we'll be doing a little fastener at the end, really super easy. And as the title here says, it's odd count, so we have the ability to work with a center point. Super handy for patterns. A lot of folks have discovered that they can take their loom patterns and stitch them up like this. So if you've bought a loom pattern before and you want to try it in the herringbone stitch, the bead configuration orientation is the same as it would be for loom square. So you can try that out and see, but the beads are facing this way instead of that way. So you get a different look, but it still works, if that makes sense, which is not true for peyote. A peyote, it wouldn't work, right? Because you'd have like a offset bead position. So this is just a little fun tip that if you have, for example, like a chevron pattern that you've used on your loom, that's going to work for this, and definitely try it. I love doing that. The thread I'm using in the needles, I'm using a size 10 hard beading needle, and I'm working with Wildfire. And in both of these designs, I used frost, or at least in this one for sure, I used frost, but I'll work with black today so you can see what I'm doing. And last but not least, we're going to need some scissors and some chain nose pliers. So I'm going to grab those real quick. I'm going to be using the precision scissors to cut my Wildfire. And then I'm going to have a pair of chain nose pliers just to flatten the end of the Wildfire. It makes it easier to get your needle threaded. All right. So if you're loving this pattern, I'm going to stick with it for instruction today. I always tell people for a design like this, you're going to have to add thread. So just cut a comfortable working length. And then when you're doing your ladder stitch, if you prefer to do a double ladder versus a single, that will work fine for this. You can do that. I'll be doing a single just because it worked out with the embellishment to have the embellishment 1-for-1 on each, symmetrically placed on the same bead going up the side. It kind of magically works that way if you do a single start. If you do a double start, you might have to go down a bead, but it's fine. It'll still work. And then let's see. I said for length, just, comfortable length, like a wingspan, a little less, a little more, whatever you'd like to work with. And the reason for that is you will definitely have to add thread. This one I had twice for these, adding a wingspan. With quite a bit left at the second wingspan, so I probably could go with a half wingspan on that last add. So maybe that will help somebody out. And these are each beaded lengths of about 7 inches. All right. And so you want to thread your beading needle, and somehow that magically worked for me without showing you the trick that I usually do, which is you flatten the end, and it makes it paper thin, easier to get through needle. For whatever reason, mine just worked. So lucky day, I guess. And let's see, for bead colors, I'm trying to think of what would be easiest to see. And I think this one still is our easiest bet for being able to see what we're doing. So I'm going to go with these colors. They're also our originals. And I'm going to show you a little trick I wrote for myself here. I laid them out as A, B, C, D, E. And then when I switch order in the middle, it goes to E, D, A, B, C. It spells that all out here by color name. But if you wanted to use different colors, it will help you out if you're switching to a new palette. Lay them out this way, stitch that for the first half, then reorder them like this for the second half. That's E, D, A, B, C. So let's start with this. Here's my A, my silver. And also, just while I'm laying out the beads, if you have questions, as always, we are happy to answer them. You just drop those in the chat, and Carmi's monitoring the chat, and she will see your question, and she'll let me know when those pop up. And so the next one is B, Barley for me. And again, I'm just following the original design. So this is the one that's on the cover. All right. And then I'm going to go to my transparent. This is a frosted transparent. It says green, but it's really like a teal, right? It's like a teal aqua. It is one of my favorite colors from the original planogram, if not my top favorite. I do love all these blues. And our versatile aqua. Okay. Or sorry, turquoise. And then I'm going to just start with the first one. So what I did on this design, let me show you really quick. I did change the side embellishment color when I got to the midpoint. So for the first half, I'm going to be using my silver. And for the second half, we'll switch and we'll use that. All right. So to get started, you just want to do a basic ladder stitch. I'm going to go a little speedy through it, but if you have questions, let me know. This is one of the ones that we covered a little more detailed in the 101 class. And I'm going to work it as a single row, not with a double. So there's my A and my B bead. And I'm going to go back up through the A bead. Pull tight. Leave about a 12-inch tail. So for me, that's like about there. I use my mat to measure sometimes because my mat is about 12 inches. So you can always do that. And once you've done that, you'll have this, right? You need to go back down through the B bead to get yourself in position to add the next one. And so sometimes what optionally you can reinforce, I'm going to skip reinforcing because we're going to be doing herringbone, and herringbone's going to go back through all these beads again. So I'm just going to very kind of, I don't know, just gently encourage it by pinching the beads as I add each one to keep them to stay in a plane, in a straight line. But like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect because it's going to be gone through again in our next row. So there's my A and my B. There's my C bead. I'll just bring that down through this one. Little tight bead here. There we go. There's C. And again, see, I'm just going to pinch it. You'll know you're doing it right if you leave a bead indent on your hand. This is my little trick for not having to reinforce. And here's D. Bring that down. Here's our middle bead, color E. And so you're just adding the bead, going back up through it. So now we're at our midpoint. We've got all those colors going there. And now we're just going to work backwards. So just head back the other way. Let's pick up the D bead again. Here's the C bead. And here's B. All right, so far so good. Let's get our A bead. And so this trick here, even though it's kind of hard to demo, that's why I'm showing it for you guys today in this class, but in like a beginning class, I would lay it on the mat. This trick honestly is the way to get a lot of ladder started. It stays pretty straight, but the whole time I was covering it up so you couldn't see what I was doing, but you can see that hand position makes a really big difference, and it's faster too, right? So maybe that helps somebody out when you're starting your ladders. And then if all else fails, that double ladder, meaning you would stack 2A and then you'd go through 2B and then loop through, the double ladder always ends up being more of a straight line. So there's always that as an option to you. But this works most of the time. So try that. And now we're going to start the herringbone rows. And so for the herringbone rows, they're normal until we get to the end. But let me show you the chart anyway, just so I can explain where we're at. So we did all that. And now we're just going to come back through and we're going to do normal herringbone stitch until we get to this end where we've got an odd number hanging out here. So let's start with our A bead, B bead. And I'm going to just flip it. I like to work heading that direction for me because I'm right-handed. Let's bring that down. And so your beads will sit in that beautiful herringbone position that we all like so much. Come back up through the next bead in your laddered row. And then string the next ones. And now at this point, you're just matching color for color. So even though we're doing the same thing, we're working up and back through the layout of A through E. You can just look at the color below to know which one to pick up. So that's what we've got so far. And it's kind of going really well for me. They're just sitting right there. They don't always do that. You can help them if they don't, and help them out. I'm sure an example will present itself at some point here. Let's see how this one does. Oh, there we go. Okay. So there's one where it kind of went wonky. See how it's just kind of sitting like that. To help it out while pulling, just push down. Most of the time that'll work. All right, so we're at the last one, coming up through that last bead in our laddered row. And here's where we're going to do an odd count turn. All right, I'm just going to take the opportunity to tighten these here. So the basic structure of what we're going to do is we're going to add the bead we need to finish this row. Then we're going to add the bead we need to start the next one, all in one swoop. And if you're doing an embellishment, you add the embellishment after that second bead. If you're not doing an embellishment, skip the embellishment and follow these same steps and it'll still work, but you'll be able to see your thread on the side. Same as with regular herringbone. So if you're not doing the little 11 O's like I'm doing, you can still do this. Just you just pick up the bead for the end of this row, the bead for the next row, and then we go back down through the bead for this row. You pull tight, it tightens it up against, and then you just finish the row as normal. So this works either way, embellishment or not. If you skip the embellishment, your thread will show on the side here where the seed beads are. You'll just see the little thread jump. It looks fine. It looks great. I do it all the time. And so don't worry about it if you like that better. The embellishment is really cute though. So either way, it's going to work for you. Let's do it. Okay, so let's pick up our 2A beads here. I'm going to slide that down. And then we're going to pick up 2 of our embellishment beads. And I'm using 11/0, so 2 versus 1 8/0 works really well for height. If you're doing an 8/0 bead with 3 15s, that's going to work too. If you're doing 11/0, you can do 2 15s, that kind of stuff. That always works. And so you'll have this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip the 2 embellishment beads. I'm going to skip the bead that we added for the row we're starting next. And I'm going to go back through the bead that completes the second row. So it looks just like that. And you can help it sit. This part is really forgiving. Don't worry if it spins. Help it stay as close as you can, meaning this bead right here, staying as close as it can to that bead. But again, don't worry because you get another opportunity to tighten it after this spot. But what will happen is the bead that finishes your row will come down and snuggle up against the one below it. And then the bead that's going to start the next row will just hang in space like that with the embellishments on the side of it. They might face one direction or the other, meaning you see how this bead, the 8/0 bead, is kind of heading the way I want it and the embellishments sort of on the side. But a lot of time you get this, where your embellishments on the inside and the beads on the out. I don't sweat it. I just keep going. It fixes itself when you come back. So let it do what it's going to do. It's going to spin on you. Let it be there. And then just go back and start doing the rest of the row. So from here, we're down through that bead right there, that 8/0 bead. It's the one that finishes row 2. And we're going to come up through the row 2 bead, and that's next in the line there. I'm just going to pull that out. That's my tail thread getting caught. Okay, and you know, it's doing the thing right now where it's going the way I want it to, because for some reason the beads are just magically doing what I want today. Again, it doesn't always do that. Don't worry if it doesn't. So that's working. Picking up the next 2 colors in my row. Again, I'm judging that by what's below it, barley and then gold. But you can always just take a look at your order too to get that. Come down through the gold one. Help it sit side by side a little bit there. There we go. So far, so good. We're just finishing the row. Get the next ones on. I'm gonna help that one. All right. And the tail thread's going to get in the way just a little. We'll just push it out of the way. All right, so from here, we're at the end. I'm just going to go down through this one. And remember I was mentioning earlier about having done the single ladder start. We don't have to do any kind of like weaving down to get our embellishment to line up with the other side because, well, it's the first embellishment, sort of, and it's going to be on the second bead, see? This one's hugging the second bead, and this one's hugging the second bead. So I just go straight to it. And it works if you've done the single ladder start. And so from here, you're exiting from that row 2 bead, just picked up 2 11/0. And I'm going to come up through the row 3 bead and just pull tight. So there's our 3 rows. And it's a little, open over here. That's okay. It fixes itself as we head back over there. We'll do a couple more rows to show you how that looks. And then I'll check in with everyone and see if we need to show any different stuff, like start again or anything like that. But oops, looks like I might have picked up an extra. No, I did okay. So I did one, well, did I? I picked up an extra bead that I didn't need there. I meant to pick up just one. There we go. I just need the A bead and B bead that start row 4. There we go. Okay. So there's the first 2 there. Let's come up through the next one. And I'm going to flip it. Now they're being wonky. Perfect. Okay, so you can show straightening those out. Next colors. All right, now we're back to the odd count. The odd count turn. So we just finished that the last one where we had a pair, right? And so let's take a quick look at what's going on over here. We've got our embellishment beads on the side. And when I get to the next one, I'm going to change the color of the embellishment bead so you guys can see it better. But I've got my 2 embellishment beads. I've got the row 2 bead. I want to go through the row 3 bead, right? That's the bead that we added extra when we did our last turn. So we're going through the 8-0 bead there. See it? That's the last one of row 3. And when you do that, you can pull tight. You don't need to pull that tight. What it'll do is it'll join this, and now it looks just flawless. It's like connected. But if you pull super, super tight right here, it might actually pull this bead up, and you don't really want to do that. So this is kind of like a medium tension thing that you're doing here. All right, let's change the color of the embellishment. Let's start with the last bead we need for row 4. The first bead we need for row 5. Slide that down. And then I'll just grab these, a little bit easier to see, right? Got 2 of those. Put that down. Okay. And I like to work this kind of from my left to my right. Slide those down. Okay. So you've got the 2 beads and the embellishment. I'm going to connect that bead there, and I'm just going through that bead by itself. So it's loose. We can move it all around. It's a little bit wonky, but what I like to do is just connect it like that, and then just hold it and just pull. And you see what's happening here. It's loose, it's hanging out in space, but once I make this connection here, it comes down. I might have to help this one. There we go. And that's what you get there. You get the embellishment beads and the first bead of row 5 just kind of hanging out. And then you've got those 4. And everything's a little bit loose still, but we'll tighten up. And when I show you finishing it, you'll see how that last row just gets stitched right back up when you end with this row. This is the kind of row you'd end on, this back pass here. So there we go. See, it just kind of just disappears right there. And as I finish this row back, what I'll do is I'll add the other color, and also in turquoise. We'll do the embellishment in turquoise on this side too. Another way to help them. Just kind of needle under the second one and help it sit in that V shape. The reason I straighten it now, not later, is because later you'll have extra length of thread that you don't want. So straightening those out in the moment is the right thing to do. So I'm just gonna lift that up. Of course, that's not gonna work. There we go. And let's get our 2 11-0s and jump up through the row 5 bead. So that's the last row. That's the row you'd want to end with if you were finishing it up. But I have a trick for finishing that last row that I'm going to show before, I might show it twice actually, but it's definitely, the reason is it's open. See, this part here is open. This part here is open. So there's a trick for finishing that last row that we need to see. But before I go to that, just want to make sure, how are we all feeling about this? Should I start over? Should I keep going? Should I show a few more rows? What do you guys think?
Danielle, just from watching the sidebar, I think the best thing to do is continue going through your steps,
Okay.
take it till the end because of our time, and we're at the halfway point.
Okay.
And time permitting, if you could show the first 3 rows again, so that anybody who missed it or need a little refresher, that would be the best thing if they're going to do it this weekend.
Awesome. Let's do that. Yeah. So the only things that I have left to show here is, in addition to putting the clasp on and finishing it, I was going to just do a quick demo of changing the order.
Do it.
And yeah. And so a couple ways you can do that. You can move the beads around, which is what I actually do because my brain, sometimes it just can't do the transition like that, especially for the first row. So what I did is I wrote this earlier. I showed this E, D, A, B, C. So here's my A, B, C, D. E is going to be the first one. And let me get my skipper. So let's move my E to be first. And then I'll move this one to be my second. And then it looks like I made my A, my third bead. So these are going to become my new A, B, C, D, E. And then I made this one the next one. So just move your piles. It helps, I think. And we'll go back to using silver so you can see transition there. And you'll want to make that switch. If you like this and you're doing that switch midway, the place you want to do that, it's easiest to do it after you've finished an even count turn side, right? Otherwise, you've got that extra bead hanging out. It is possible to do that. If you end up where, I really want to change the color and I want to do it here, you would pick up the bead in the first color that you need and the bead in the second color that you need. So you would maybe pick up the old color and then the new color when you're doing your odd count turn, if you're doing it that way, but this is easier. Just go in that direction. So now I know my A and my B are these guys. And maybe for this design, I'll finish it and it'll just be like a color block changing back and forth between these two. That would be kind of cool. Gold and then back. That first switch is tricky because your mind wants to pick up the wrong color, right? So you got to kind of force it to make that switch. At least that's how it is for me, kind of. And then now that I'm here on this side, I'm going to do one more odd count turn here. Let's flip it. Okay, so I'm going to pick up the bead that I need to finish this row, the bead that I need to start the next one, and then my optional 2 embellishment beads, little 11s. Slide that all down. Let's do our turn. And there's one where the embellishment beads popped into the center. Don't worry about it. They're going to flip back around. You just come back up this way. And you keep stitching on. So I'm going to show here, let's pretend this is our last row. I'll show this twice because I have another sample here I can pull out. And this is one where it kind of helps to see it twice. I know it's in the handout and it makes sense to you completely once you've seen it once. If it doesn't already, don't worry, it will after this and we'll do it twice. But this is how to close up one of these types of designs when you're done so that you don't have those gaps in between each column. So from here, I'm going to pick up the color that I'm next adding, right? And so what you would usually do is you would pick up these 2 beads, right? and you'd go down through here and you'd start the rest, right? Instead, just pick up the first bead you need, the next one, and go like that. And then you can come up. Go down. And sometimes that helps. See, so it kind of makes it look like more like a laddered row. So try that if you like it. And then you can come up to the next one and do the same thing. It's just a little weird because when you've got odd count, I feel like it seems like you're doing something wrong because you're going the wrong direction in your V's. So if you're feeling that and you don't like this, finish the row normally and then weave back through it if you want. That's another thing you can do. It just depends what you like. And I am curious, let me know, guys, in the chat if you think this is cool or if you like just finishing it regularly and then going back through it. Oops, and I went down one too many beads there, sorry. I meant to just go through this one. Sorry about that. A little confusing there. We'll do this twice, so don't worry. See, we're just adding the next one. And I'm just matching my colors. There we go, just through that one. But I just want to make sure I say also that this is totally optional if you like it. And if you don't use it. And so then you get a finished edge like that, see? So try it out. It'll look like this on this one. See how it kind of looks like that. See if you like it. If you don't, try something different. And again, it started here in the handout. We did our turn and then we came back down, came back up here, add that bead. So it just links them all, right? And let's see, I'll just check in, see how everyone's doing. Should I move on and do it one more time on this sample? Or we can put a clasp on this one and then come back to it.
And yeah, let's put a clasp on it.
Put a clasp on it? Okay. So on either end, I'm going to start with this one over here. Grab another needle here. And pinch that. Okay, so from the starting side, I'm working with the tail side to start. You just want to weave to exit from the middle one. Super easy, just heading over there. There's our center. And then I'm going to grab one of those clasps that we've got over here. Pretty easy to pull off there. So starting with the toggle side. On that side, I'm just going to pick up one bead and I'm just going to match the color that I'm exiting from. And then pick up the clasp and go back through that bead and down through the one that's below it. And when you do that, you'll get a little look like that. It'll hug it just like that. And now we want to reinforce it. And so to turn, in between all of these little beads down here, see there's the thread that's connecting one to the other. You can grab those and use those as ways to turn. So to capture one, you can just go under it and go under that one. And hopefully that's visible. But what I did is I kind of just went under one of those threads there. Grabbing that, pull through, flip it over. And then I'm going to head up through those 2 beads again. Plate. And there you go. And I'm going to head down through 2 beads this time. So last time we just went down through this bead and we used the thread bridge over that one. Now I'm going to go down through two more. The one we added, the one it's attached to, and then the one below. So a total of 3. Same thing. I'm just going to grab the little thread bridge that's below the one below it. And you'll need to switch sides because on this side, my thread bridge that connected this one was on this side. I'm going to grab the one on this side this time. And that will center it. And also there's a thread bridge on either side of my connection there. So I'm going to come up through here. And I do think 2 passes is fine. I'm doing 3 just for strength since this is going to be a tugged on, this connection is going to get some pressure when you're putting it on and off. So why not have 3 reinforcements if you've got the space in the 8 beads, right? And now I'm going to come down through 4 or 5 beads, whichever your needle wants to do. And so that one is connected really nicely there. And all you have left to do is weave in. Weaving in super easy. Just follow your thread path through the design. So I'm just going to go through a couple beads. I find herringbone is really nice for weaving in. And one of the places where it really tends to lock really nicely is on these turns. And when you're weaving in from the starting side, your turns will be going in the opposite direction. Keep in mind, so you just want to come up and go down through that. There we go. Having trouble seeing that. Okay. And then from here, I'm going to keep going into the bead there. So just keeping track of where your thread is already going and just following it. Follow that path. I'm going to go through a few more beads and then trim it. And bonus, when I work the rest of this bracelet, I'll have no pesky tail thread to deal with because I've already woven it in. I'm probably good to trim it now, but I'm doing something extra. I'm going to go ahead and go through the other side. And the reason I did that is it gives me a little more confidence that this area is reinforced on both sides. It's going to get a lot of pull. And let's trim it. This is going to be an easy spot to trim. So I'm going to pull right there. Okay, so a lot of you guys have a burner. If you're doing a burner, that's great. Burners are wonderful. If you're not using a burner and you're using scissors like me, go ahead and just push down and pull up. So put it on the mat flat, bring your scissors onto the thread, but before you cut, pull up on that thread and push down with those scissors, and it will cause the thread to, in theory, unless you miss it like I did, go back into the bead. So that kind of helps. And then there's also the little tiny thread scissors are also cool, pretty cool for getting in those little tiny spots. And we're doing pretty good. We've got about 15 minutes. So we've covered everything I wanted to cover. I can show things twice because I've got extra samples in a bunch of different places. So a bunch of different stages of completion is what I meant. So if there's anything that you guys want to see, even if it's just starting over, I can do that. So I think we've got the time.
Danielle, it's the starting over that's been requested.
Starting over. Okay, gotcha. That's easy. Let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to get another needle. Actually, I'm just going to steal this needle because I think I used my other one. All right, and I'm going to just go with the same colors since they are out. Let's start with a new strand. And again, you're just going to start with, don't worry about the length because you're going to end up adding thread. Adding thread, we covered that in the 101 that's linked in the handout, but we also just did it. When you're weaving in, that's adding thread. in a nutshell. You weave in just like that, and then you weave your old strand up into some new rows after you've made a few new rows. Okay, this time I'm gonna make sure I show this part. So let's just zip through the ladder stitch really quick. And I've got my beads in the opposite order, but that's okay. We're gonna just go ahead and work. Let's work one like this, ABC. And the other way. 12-inch tail roundabouts, that's what you're gonna need to put on your clasp like we were just showing. And I picked up the first bead and the second bead and strung them. And then I'm going back up through my first bead. Really tight. So they sit side by side like that. And what I'm going to do to ladder every time we add a new, so to go down through the next bead here. So that's our B bead. And I'm going to hold these now like this to do my laddered row. And what I'm doing is I'm pinching kind of hard as I add each new bead. And the reason I'm doing that, so I don't have to reinforce, but it'll still stay in a straight line, which saves me a set of thread passes. Because as you saw, we did a couple passes through that bead when we added our clasp. And I thought it was handy not to have so many. This is one way to not have to do that, is if you, a lot of people reinforce their ladder so they'll stay in a straight row. And it's a great practice if you've got the real estate, but if you don't, like I feel like we don't toward the end there, that's why I'm doing just one pass. That said, if you want to reinforce it, you could always just switch to like a size 12 beading needle, or, you know, only do like maybe 2 reinforcements when you're doing your clasp, but just totally fine. All I'm doing here is just adding each new bead in the laddered row, A through E, and then back down again. It goes pretty quick. Here's the last one. All right, so I covered it up the whole time, but that's how you can get a straight line without reinforcing. It's mostly straight. It's going to look even better when we do our next row. So let's add our next row. And picking up the same colors that I'm going to be matching below, just A and then B. And we'll just come down through the next bead here. Pull tight. And then up. Next 2 colors. All we're doing is we're picking up the colors that are next in the row, the next 2, and then we're just jumping up through the one that's after that. And when I get to the last color, I just switch back the other direction, working this way and then back. And then up through the silver one. I cannot wait to see the colors you guys choose. All right, here we are at the end of that ad. So what we've done is we finished most of row 2, and now we're stuck, right? Now we've got an odd count turn. And so I'm going to show that how to start that. So go ahead and just come up through that last bead when you've got here. Take the opportunity to pull those apart. And get a nice tight connection there. And you'll have that. So let's add the first bead, which is going to be the bead that completes row 2, right? Just slide that down. And now add the first bead of row 3. And pick up 2 embellishment beads. And in our case, we're using 2 size 11. You could also use 3/15s. You can also use no embellishment. That will work too. and then just slide those down. So from here, what you want to do, skip the 2 embellishment beads, skip the bead that's starting row 3, and then just only go through the bead that is going to be the last one of row 2. This is easier done flat on the mat, but I want you guys to be able to see it. So I'm just going to hold it up. And so this bead, you want it to stay as close to that bead as you can, but it tends to just automatically do it once you pull through. It can help if you use a gravity assist like I'm doing. And then what ends up happening is those 2 embellishment beads, they kind of like, they hug the side of that row 3 bead, and you're in position now to finish the rest of row 3 because you're down through this bead. So you want to come up through that bead, and then you're just going to finish the row. So let's do that really quick. Let's grab this one, this one. And I find that after I add the first column of that row, the first true column, that this just tends to all just go like I want it to. See, it just popped right into place somehow. It tends to do that some of the time. And if it doesn't, you don't worry about it, because when you come back on that pass back, we pick it up and use it to turn, which really locks it down. Here's the next ones. But yeah, so from here, you're pretty much just sailing. You got it. And there's that. Let's get our side beads. And we're going to go from the row 2 bead right up through the row 3 bead. Give that an extra pull here. I'm tightening that. And then there you go. So that's all set. And again, this is the side you'd want to end on if you were finishing, because see, we have a full set of 3 rows there. And you just repeat that all the way back up until you're at your end there. How are we doing? We're still doing good on time. So I'm just going to check in with Carmi, see if there was any questions I missed when I was doing that part of the demo.
No, Danielle, you're doing great. I just wanted to thank you again, because I'm also one of your students. You know, not only did you teach us odd count today, but you managed to convince us to put on side embellishments. And halfway through your design, you think that we can switch over to a new color block. So you are definitely not underestimating your students, and I appreciate that very much. You're definitely giving us a challenge. So I think really the only thing left, if you would just show one more time, is what you did do at the halfway point.
Oh yes, switching the colors.
And that's the switching colors is tough. And then hopefully everyone will know what they're doing. And if not, they'll wait till the recording on Tuesday.
Awesome. Okay. So what I did we're in reverse now because we started on this side, and I did have a different color embellishment so you could see what I was doing. But on this one, of course, I matched it, right? So if you want to switch from what you did for the first half, which was you laid them out as A, B, C, D, E, you can switch back to E, D, A, B, C. So that means just move your beads positions. So here's my A, B, C, D, and E. So I'm going to make, let's see here, E is my first one. And that's going to really swap things around for this design. Actually, it's going to swap it because of the way I laid these out. It's really interesting. But yeah, it's interesting. So it's going to put them in a different order than the one of my original, because we started from the other side. Originally, this was my A. But basically, you would just, if you're doing this palette, like for example, when I was doing this palette, I started off with A, B, C, D, E, and then I flipped it over, and it was E, D, A, B, C. But I'm very baffled now as to why that changed. Somebody shout out in the chat if they understand what just happened, because I totally don't. But basically, what I want is my silver color to be my A. I'm just looking at this one. And then my gold. There we go. And that will become your middle color. So switching them back and forth. And I'm not sure why that didn't exactly work out, but as I hoped, but you definitely want to take a look at what I wrote up here. If you're using the same colors as me. And then just swap them. And the first time you swap them, that will work. When you try to swap them back, it's going to do something funny. Sorry about that. I didn't expect that. Oh yeah, so Carol says, I think on the restart, you just took the beads in the order you had them on the mat. Yeah, okay, that's true. Yeah, and so it reversed back in a different direction. I assumed that it would reverse back in the same direction, but now the math, I have math curiosity happening, or I'm gonna have to like go down the rabbit hole and figure that out after this. I'll let you guys know. But basically, in theory, if you started this way, switch to that and it'll work the first time, but not on the trip back. Okay, so let's see where we're at. We got a few more minutes. Any more questions for me on how many more rows would be halfway? Okay, so let's see here. How many rows did I do here? I've got 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to show you the beads per inch actually. And so in beads per inch in herringbone, it ends up roughly being the strung length. So if you look at your 8/0 beads strung, and for me, that's coming out as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's 11 beads per inch. In this case, that should correspond roughly to the strung length that you would get for an 8/0 bead in general, but 11. And so I changed at 33, roughly. So 33, and then I got to the 6 inches, and then another 33 to get to the full length. And then when you put your clasp on, you get closer to 7, especially with all the adds here. So if you want to add or take away inches, just know that 11 beads per inch or 11 rows per inch will get you there. And then you can just kind of calculate your halfway point at that way. What I did, truth be told, on this one is I put it on and I looked at it and I said, okay, my clasp is going to be right about there. And then I just kind of went with my halfway point. But if you're designing for selling, you can use a bracelet board, calculate it that way, or just go with those number of inches, 11 beads per inch, 11 rows per inch. Yeah, let's see what else. What else can I show you guys? Oh yes, and so we didn't completely show adding thread. We did show it, but we were doing it as a weave in. But adding thread is the same as weaving in. And so we do have a link in the handout that shows a class where we did that. It's this one here for our back to basics. But just to weave in, basically just bring your new strand in somewhere in the work, follow your existing thread path until the tail stops moving, trim that tail, make a few more new rows, and then take your old working thread and weave it up into the new rows that you just made. That way you'll maintain your nice flowiness that you got going there. That's something to think about. You know, it's not required, but it helps, right? What else I could show? Let's see, we've got a few minutes. Carmi, should I show next week? I don't have next week I don't have a project for you, but we do have what's called like it's a color theory class. So we had a lot of requests from folks to do it's like seed bead palettes. So seed bead palettes are always, they get a lot of attention. They do really well in shops and in finished jewelry. So what I thought I'd do is I would kind of like share what I think is my secret sauce for making a seed bead mix. And it turned into a, hey, well, let's talk about color theory while we're at it. So I did some research and I kind of educated myself a little bit on why I do what I do. Some of it, I honestly, I just eyeball it and I don't know why I like it, but I do. But I sit there and play with it for a long time. So I wanted to put some actual science on that. So I looked into like, what are our eyes seeing when we're seeing color, and what can you do with seed beads? Because in seed beads, you've got different finishes, different linings, and you can also use the sizes to change the texture. So this is going to be fun. And I'm still putting the final polishes on that handout, but I'm going to summarize it all in a really nice PDF with some part numbers for all the mixes we made. And one of the mixes that I already have done is going to be used in the class that's after that one. And that one is we're going to do odd count peyote. So we did odd count herringbone today. And if you survived that with me and you want to try something challenging next, we're going to do the odd count peyote. And then just to kind of throw in something extra, because a lot of you guys already know odd count, I put a buttonhole closure. That's something that comes naturally with odd count peyote. It's really cool because you get a center point, right? So we'll do that, and we'll make a little button cuff. And it's using my new Seaside mix that I made using the same colors that we had out today with a few extra colors. I threw some black in there, and I think I have one extra kind of white. There's white pearl, there's opaque white. So, but that's the only addition, that and a little peppers of some black seed beads in there. So we'll make our own mix. We'll turn that into that. We'll do that with some
Danielle,
colors.
thank you so much. I'm sure by the time that class is over, everyone's going to want us to put that mix right into the stores as well. So yeah, I'm laughing about that. People are definitely looking forward to your color theory and seeing how your mind works, coming up with these color patterns. You're just about out of time, Danielle, but I swore I would ask you before the class is over, what are you wearing on your wrist?
Oh, free pattern on my website. It's on, I actually have a dozen or so patterns on my website, daniellewicksjewelry.com. And that is my like alien flowers and Martian flowers. I don't know. I went crazy one day making something silly. And so I ended up,
it was noticed. It was noticed. And yeah, people wanted to know if it was a class right away. So there you go. And you also have a special set of earrings on today too.
Yeah. So is it okay to mention the crystals?
A little bit.
So just a hint, there's new things coming to Michael's, guys. New, amazing, awesome, beautiful things. And if you spot the round crystals here, that should give you a little hint. This is going to be, it'll either be a September class or a video. I haven't decided if it's going to be just like a video, special video or not, because this is like an hour will be tight, right? So I was gonna, like, Carmi, I'll talk to you about it. We'll have to figure out like how, I think this is about 90 minutes unless we do a video where you can do like jump aheads, right? You know, with some of the like,
gorgeous
stop magic. But anyway, it's a lot of people have asked me about connecting beads. So we've done bead around a bead. If you haven't seen that class, we did this a while ago. It was the sun bead around a bead class where we did that. I did that with a coin bead. These are ceramic coin beads that are brand new in Michael's. We just got those. And I snagged those, and then I connected a 6mm Czech crystal, and I started stitching around it in a kind of new and unusual way where you can like combine your brick. So these are called the Sea Sparkle earrings, and we're just now submitting these. I think they'll pop up on the website at some point, and then there'll either be a video or a class, one or the other. We'll figure out how to get this out there to you. Yeah, and then I also just finished I just got July up. I noticed the first July one is ready, but not sure about the ones after that. But let's see what's next after this. After herringbone, we do, there's herringbone color theory, then there's odd count peyote, and then we've got our hoops and our the last parts of June, our crystal wrap bracelet / choker / anklet, whatever you want it to be. And then we're going to do our macrame hoops. And then Maria, if you're still here, I got you. Maria emailed me and she asked me if we could do peyote increase and decrease, since we've already covered all the other stuff that in peyote world. So, and forgive me, this one doesn't have a clasp on it yet. I'm still getting to that, but this is already ready to sign up and the PDF is ready. You can download it right now. And I did a necklace. This is all the same stitch. So like you'll be able to do this just learning one stitch, all these ideas. And then I've even made a ring because you can bring it together into a ring. So this is going to be fun. I'm really looking forward. Thank you for the idea, Maria, for that. That's a really, really cool idea. That one's already there, and not sure if this one's there yet, but it will be soon. We got some flower power stud earrings because we just needed to do something with brick stitch. I wanted to do something fun. This has a cool peyote start. Another thing we got asked about was, can you start brick stitch with peyote? And at first I said, I don't think so. And then I was wrong. So I figured it out. I'm going to show you how I did that one. And then last but not least, we've got a stringing one. And this is Stash Buster. So all those little beads that you bought for all of these classes for the last like many, many years that you've got little ones or twosies left over, I'm going to use those up and a little fun kind of like beading wire, just a stringing. This will just be us relaxing, stringing and chatting together. So it'll be really fun. Great. That's all I got for so far. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of new stuff coming. So I can't wait for you guys to see everything that we've got coming up. Keep your eyes peeled because we've been busy. Like, Hermie, would you say we've been busy?
It's busy and it's hard to keep it all a secret, but the summer's arrived and there's a lot of great news to come.
Yeah, so stay tuned, guys, and thank you for being here today. It's great to see you. Happy beading hearts to you guys.